Hello guys, today I'm answering the request to take a look at one of the free people strategies of movie format. I would like to start with some key cards which Rohan has in this format, and I'm going to go over three basic strategies which you can build in movie block, and they all have their different purposes. And I will speak in detail also about what shadow strategies you can pair them up with generally and what to look out for. So generally Rohan is not too much to be seen in the competitive formats for two reasons. Firstly, anything that Rohan can do, other cultures can do better. For example, Gondor can easily liberate sites with Elendil, whereas Rohan either has to go through the Valiant strategy and then the event Let Us Be Swift, which I'm going to show right now. So for having 3 Valiant men, you can discard up to 2 conditions and liberate a site. That looks pretty good. The only problem is that the Valiant companions are generally quite trash compared to their other alternatives. Remember that if you want to play your Valiant version of Eomer, then you are not going to play, for example, 3rd Marshal, which is generally better for skirmishing minions. And the second reason why Rohan is not so often to be seen is that the companions generally have very below average stats. So if you take a look at, for example, Hama, yes, he has a very good ability that can kind of counter Castamir of Umbar with Raider Halberd combination, but then he's going to die. And if you play, for example, a Gondor deck where you have big Aragorn, or in dwarves it could be, for example, Durin, and etc. Rohan doesn't really have any big, strong companion that is sort of a must-have. The closest to that is Eomer, 3rd Marshal, but besides his combat capabilities, he is quite weak. He has only 3 vitality. He can take a few hits, but he's not going to remove minions from the board, unlike Durin or, for example, Aragorn with Aragorn's bow. So Rohan in these criteria stays slightly behind, but still. What is this culture able to do? So firstly, Hama is a very good card that you can generally spam at the early stage of the game. It might even be worth it to start with something like Eowyn and Hama if you are afraid of the Raider Halberd, or perhaps Hama with probably Eowyn is going to be the best option here, because you then can play only companions which either need to spot some other companion for reducing their twilight cost, such as Eomer, or you have to just spot a man and there's no other man in the starting fellowship. So here you can see Theoden has to spot another man to make twilight cost -1. Eomer also costs 3, so you have to spot another man, and Hama himself has to spot another man, so he has to be that second companion that you choose for your starting fellowship. A more general starting fellowship would be 3rd Marshal, that is Eomer in his most competitive form for skirmishing, with, for example, Eowyn. Now let's take a look at another card, that is Fell Deeds Awake. So unless decks like Hillman have a way to deal with this condition, it is going to be repeatedly spammed to liberate sites for nothing. There's a very simple way how to lose initiative in Rohan, using the 2 following allies. So Deor for skirmish, which is one of the best ways in Rohan how to win skirmishes without putting much effort in it. And Leowyn is a perfect healing mechanism that many shadow strategies have a hard time dealing with. If you are a southern archery player and your opponent plays Leowin, you are probably not going to have any cards in your deck that will deal with her, and therefore you as a Rohan player gain the upper hand, because each turn you can spam 3 heals in the fellowship phase, and then you can go and you are relatively healed. The one before last card in the Rohan's Prime key cards is Mary's Sword, so that of course requires Mary that you need to play in your deck. There is only one alternative of Mary that really comes that really can be considered, and that is Mary Swordthane. He can be well combined with the Rohan culture, playing up to 2 Rohan possessions, which are typically Rohan bows. I'm going to show you those. So Rohan bows are a very good combination with Mary's Sword, because what happens is, in maneuver, you exert Mary twice to exhaust minions that you don't like, because you have many Rohan companions on board, and then you finish the minions which are exhausted off by using Rohirrim Bow ability. Then in skirmish you let their one minion that you don't really mind allowing to skirmish. You put Mary back into your hand using his ability that plays the Rohan Bow and perhaps some other possession from this card pile, and then you play Mary again on your next turn. So it is a sort of a very sophisticated and resilient deck based around the sustain mechanic. That means that you heal to the fullest extent and then you move again. On the other hand, it doesn't have many means how to get rid of minions, except for what I have just mentioned. Then making the double move might be slightly difficult. Later I'm going to show you a version of Rohan which tries to excel at removing any dangerous minions from the board. And Eowyn, Lady of Ithilien, the last of the highlighted cards, is a card which you can see in other decks, not the pure Rohan ones, as well, due to her ability to clear the board of minions. So if you pair her up with, for example, a Glass Greenleaf, which is a companion that on its own is very devastating for the shadow minions. If you combine it with Eowyn, then Greenleaf basically puts the early wounds on any minions that are causing you trouble, such as Castamir or some trolls, and then you assign the trolls to Eowyn and she finishes them off. It's a very strong mechanic that is used across the format, and it has worked well ever since the first guy discovered it. Now let's take a look at the 3 versions of Rohan. The first one is Classic Rohan. I personally am not a big fan of this, because it is too strongly built around Eomer, 3rd Marshal of Riddermark, and if something gets rid of him, such as Shelob, or perhaps something kills him, then it is usually very difficult for you to get out of that situation. So I built this deck around trying to wound your opponent's minions to death. That would be the version that I would personally go for. The deck is relatively huge, but thanks to the fact that you play Symbol Mine, which is a card that tutors, that means takes cards from your deck and immediately plays them, then you are -2 cards, -2 free people's cards in your deck when you play this. And what that causes in your games is that your shadow is going to be drawn more than your free people's, simply because you change the ratio of free people's and shadow cards in your deck. So that's what I'm going to talk about later when we speak about the shadows to pair up with Rohan. Now, what else do we have in this deck? The best combination is with Hobbits, simply because then you remain in the 2 cultures of free peoples. And there we have basically all the key cards which I mentioned in the Rohan key cards. So what I added: Theoden, that when he dies he gets to play another Rohan companion, That can be good when you are surprised by some big minion or some nasty attack. Then lots of protection for hobbits. There are the arrow slits, which were much better in Towers block formats, but in movie there are a lot of simple ways how to get rid of conditions before this thing is able to do anything to your shadow possessions as a shadow player. So for example, you play 3 ships as a Corsair player, which are possessions. Let's take a look at those. Now you pass. Your opponent is ready to use his arrow slits to discard one of the conditions, to discard one of the positions, I mean. But you did not allow him to do it, since playing no minions means not having a maneuver phase. So your opponent moves again. Then you play Grima with Saruman's power, and you use all of those ships that you played on the previous side to kill your opponent. So once again, you play the ships, then you discard 1 card in regroup, you draw 4 cards. Your opponent is ready to discard one of your ships, so he moves again. You play Grima, Saruman's power, arrow slits gets discarded, you don't discard the ships, and perhaps you even die on that side because your opponent still has these 3 ships to use against you. So that is the reason why arrow slits are not so good, but generally for 1 Twilight cost it makes your opponent have to deal with it somehow, so sooner or later it becomes useful. Also against cards like Grond it could be good, definitely, why not? Alright, so there is the Merry and his sword combination, King's Mail for extra safety, although in movie block there aren't many minions which are damage +1, perhaps the big murder troll. Let's see if that works. No, it doesn't. How about this? Yes, that's it. Kirith Gorgor, yes. So this minion is damage +1, it's definitely playable, and it would be very punishing for your mass possession style of playing, so you want to have some ways how to deal with this minion. So even if Merry's sword and Rohirrim bow doesn't do the trick, then what you are able to do is use King's Mail's ability to just take 2 wounds from the troll and on the next side heal by Leowen. Alright, so this version focuses more on destroying minions individually and then moving again, and when you survive the double move, then healing with Leowen's ability. Now you might ask why I play only 1 copy of Leowen, somebody might discard it. Well, firstly, discarding Leowen will be difficult since you have arrow slits, so you need for example Grond for that, but arrow slits prevents Grond from being used, so you have to play Great Hill Troll, which is a lot of Twilight cost invested into getting rid of 1 ally, and your opponent is going to gain for example 2 or 3 sides. He's going to get ahead because of this, so there comes the value of arrow slits and Leowen. And you can also tutor her easily by any of the 4 copies of Symbol Mine, as well as any other card in the deck. You are playing against Swarm, yes, so you are going to take Firefoot, Rohirrim bows, and if you are playing against, for example, archery, you are going to play Leowen first. If you play against Corsairs, then you want to play Hama as soon as possible, so that he can sacrifice himself to discard Raider Halberd possibly, etc. So there are lots of creative ways how to play around your opponent's shadow strategies. The next deck which I'm going to show you is Valiant Rohan. It looks very similar to the previous version of Rohan, with one very big difference, and that is that the whole deck is built around Let Us Be Swift. There is really no other reason why you would play why you would play Valiant Companions. You don't have Third Marshal, that is the original Eomer's ability. Instead you play this guy, and you definitely do not want to start with him. Instead you want to start with Eowyn and Theoden. Then on the first side, which is what I'm about to show you, Edoras Hall. So there you play Simple Mine, you play Eomer almost always, since if you go first and you start on this side, you will not know what your opponent's shadow strategy is, so your first step should be the same. You want to mulligan until you get Simple Mine or Eomer. You play Eomer, you review the top 10 cards as his ability says, and you play each Rohan position for -1 Twilight thanks to the Edoras Hall side on which you are starting. So that is something that you can use, and it gives you extra extra benefit at the start, because what might happen is that if you get one of those crazy open hands that you have, for example, 4 copies of Simple Mine, then you play Elfhelm, Gamling, you are starting with Eowyn and Theoden, you also play, for example, Eowyn, and then you play as the last companion Eomer, and he reveals all of these positions and you are fully equipped, you are ready to go, and it is funny, it's lots of fun with this sort of deck. And what's the best about this deck is that it can survive forever. It's almost impossible to this deck if you move just by one side at a time, because anything you try to make as a setup as a shadow player, your opponent is just going to discard it with Let Us Be Swift, he's going to liberate your sides, he's going to discard your possessions for setup by arrow slits, so very, very, very resilient 3P+. Let's take a look at the last one, the most competitive version of Rohan. Apologies, there is a ring pair missing. Yes, so the most competitive version is called Saved Rohan, much like Saved Gondor. You can see that there is no Merry in this deck because there is not enough space for him. On the other hand, what this deck can do is anything around Gandalf's tricks. You are able to discard conditions relatively easily. You can discard possessions without having to fear that your opponent discards your arrow slits first, which is the Rohan condition that I mentioned a while ago. You have also some extra safety and support for skirmishes, and you have of course the Feldit's Awake, no reason why not to play that. If there are shadow strategies like Hillman in the format, and the deck is generally very resilient as well, much like the Valiant Rohan version, but the disadvantage of it is that you are waiting for Saved from the Fire. Your starting fellowship is Gandalf, Leader of Men, and Elfhelm, so you want to burn Elfhelm and then take Eowyn, Eomer, Theoden. If your opponent plays some big minion, you kill off Theoden, you play Redhell, and then for the rest of the game you just stall it and you use Gandalf's superpowers to survive forever. I said it in a wrong way. You actually do not want to okay, let's start again. You have two options. Either the deck can look like this. You are waiting for Saved from the Fire, and the statistics of you drawing it is relatively small compared to, for example, Saved Gondor, which is able to play even 30 3P+ cards only. So you are you are risking this, but if it happens, it actually pays off, because you take 3 Simple Mine cards. Playing companions straight from the deck does not count to the limit of 4 3P+ cards in the Fellowship phase, which you can either draw or take into hand. So you take 3 Simple Mines, you play the 3 companions which I mentioned, Theoden, Eomer, Eowyn. You have just dramatically reduced the cost of the amount of 3P+ cards in your deck compared to the shadow, and your shadow strategy is thus very well supported by this 3P+. Or you have the second option, if you are afraid that something like that happens and you don't want to get into the situation of not drawing Saved from the Fire early enough, so you can discard from the deck Simple Mines, and then you have a version which is much closer to the Saved Gondor 1, because it's only 35 cards in the deck. Of course, it depends on your playstyle. You can play more servants, you can play more conditions to save Frodo from dying, etc, etc. It all really depends on your taste and on what is considered to be the meta at that time. Now, I'm going to talk about the shadow strategies which could be paired up with the Rohan culture. So in general, all three versions of Rohan have in common the fact that they are not so good at making double moves, or they can make them but it usually costs you a lot. Either companions die or you look devastated after that and you have a hard time getting out of that situation, and that's why you want to take Rohan as a support deck that survives, and you play a shadow strategy that kills your opponent sooner or later with a lot of certainty. So what are decks like that? For example, Morgul Swarm, that is the best shadow strategy in the format perhaps. So I'm not going to click the whole deck, just to show you what the deck basically looks like. So it's something like this, and then you of course have Kanta, Enquia, Lemenia, and you play Gollum, and you apply pressure on the opponent's ring bearer. Unless your opponent plays Ents or perhaps Telepathy, then any other free people strategy you should be able to kill sooner or later with this shadow strategy. So it seems like a good pair with Rohan, because it is going to kill your opponent sooner or later. What else could be a good pair with Rohan? Well, perhaps Gollum. That means Ninja Gollum, because you are generally able to discard lots of cards from hand using They Stole It, which requires having those redundant cards in hand first, and that's why this deck could be good with Rohan, for example. As for the other decks, it really depends what you want to play with it. Rohan is quite adaptable, and doesn't really matter if you play this classic Rohan version, if you play the saved Rohan version, or if you play the Valiant Rohan version. All are going to do pretty much the same, with the fact that if you play saved Rohan and the draw goes in your favor, and you draw saved from the fire early enough, then that can be good for you. So it's a sort of a risk that you need to try to count with if you want to choose Rohan as your movie block strategy. And generally, if you play, for example, Corsairs with it, it's not going to be a problem. This pair is definitely good. You can play Hillman with it, because you liberate sides as well, so you don't get into that situation that there is nothing to take control of as a Hillman player. You can pair it up with Besiegers, definitely, why not? With Southern Archery, there are really no sides that really hurt Rohan. Perhaps Steward's Tomb, but it is as dangerous for you as for your opponent. So I would say that Rohan is a very good pair to anything. It is not the best free peoples in the format, but it will serve you well no matter what you choose to play. And that is it. I hope this analysis of the culture was useful, and next week I would like to take a look at something again more global concerning the movie block format.